All right, so let's go ahead and get started then. So this has been, for lack of a better way of putting it, this has been I think, a very trying year since last Halloween time, last end of October, for just about everybody.
Yep.
There's been a lot that's been going on. We have the chaos in Washington. We have the war in Ukraine. We now have the Middle East, or really technically geographically, Southwest Asia. There's still horrible things going on in Sudan. We just had the mass shooting in Massachusetts. I
Or
have
in Maine. In
Maine,
Maine.
yeah, sorry. I have a friend who lives in that town, and when he texted
Oh,
us all, um,
wow.
he was safe. His family was safe, but he's not far from the bowling alley where all that happened.
Oh,
You can be very aware of things that are going on in the world, but sometimes they touch you closer than other times, and than other situations, because you're personally associated with the people involved or the location. So this has been a really, really tough year, I think. Let's say a challenging year for many people. Recovering from COVID. I know at my job, things have gotten very strange there. Volunteerism had gone up right after COVID, and now volunteerism is dropping again. Um, and we're having more and more seniors reach out to us than we've ever had for help and assistance. So many people are struggling, or have struggled this year. And maybe it's just been closer to home for me or whatever. It just seems like this has been an unusually difficult year. So this time of the year, as we're moving from planting and harvesting and bringing in the sheaves, if you will, and storing for Christmas and the holidays and for winter, and then bringing in having the seeds, etc., safe for next spring, so we can do it again and again, to care for our families and care for each other and our pets, etc. This is a real pivotal time of the year. We're moving from the light into the dark. This is a time where we go inward a lot more than many other times of the year. This is when the days are shorter and the nights are longer, and that's happening big time up here. Many people are leaving in the dark and coming home in the dark from work. Just feels like we're all crawling into our caves for the winter. And many people this time of the year are recognizing this is also not a good time to put things into action. This is a good time to gestate, like the mama bears do. They go into hibernation now, and then their bodies feed the babies, and the babies are growing inside the mamas. And then in those caves, the babies are born just before spring and then come out. This is a time to plan. This is a time to think. This is a time to reevaluate the future. And the next spring, when it comes, this is a time to be very introspective. And this is a time to really think about what we need as individuals and perhaps as a community, to let go of things that don't serve us, to evaluate relationships, to be clear about our relationships. It's okay to let go of those relationships that are not healthy for us. It's okay to draw boundaries. It's okay to take care of us. And this is a good time of year where we can do that safely. This is a time of, like I said, introspection and retrospection, looking and thinking and planning for the future. So let's start with just taking a few deep breaths cleaning out the stale air in our lungs. I had a doctor when I was being tested for asthma tell me that most of us do not clean our lungs out, that many of us in the bottom of our lungs, we have old, stale, and in some cases, dirty air because we are not deep breathers like we should be. We're shallow breathers and we should be deep breathing much more. And with that, I don't know, it was probably last spring when this was brought to my attention, actually through one of Julianne's Facebook pages, was the word Yahweh. And that in the Hebrew, Yahweh, there's really no vowels. I couldn't think of consonant vowels, couldn't remember which was. No vowels really in that. And the Yahweh is really a breath in and a breath out. And this isn't even about a Christian God or a Jewish God or a Palestinian God or a pagan God. It is the spirit, it is the breath that keeps us alive. It is that thing that is common to everything on this planet. Everything breathes. And we need to be able to take that deep breath and then let it out completely. So breathe in very deep with a, and really force that breath out and get the dead, stale air that's been in there and needs to get out of your lungs out completely. So force it out on the last syllable, I guess you could call it. So let's do 3 of those where we just really fill our lungs up with good air that goes in and takes place of the stale air. Part of that is also sitting up straight, which I am not really good at. But that allows your lungs to expand and then contract in the right way to get all of that good air in and the dead air out. So let's do 3 of those really deep. Breathe in with Yah and then getting it out. Okay. I'm going to do one more. Feels good. Okay. So some of you have heard this story. It's one of my favorite stories to tell, but it really characterizes how we should be looking at this time of year and our patterns and why we do what we do and getting rid of those things that are not good for us. Doesn't matter if you've done them since you were tiny. If they're not good for us, it's time to let them go. And so this is a story of the first drum. This is also appropriate to what's going on in many of the parts of the world with the conflicts that are happening right now. So this is a story of the first drum. So Yandria was looking around her village, and she noticed the village across the stream. And she was wondering why they didn't have a relationship with them. Why was this border of this river such a block to these relationships? Why was this an issue? Why did they stand at the river, the elders and the middle people and the children, and they would raise their fist at each other across the river and throw cusses and curses at each other? And she couldn't understand why. And so she went to her parents and the other parents in the village and said, why do we hate them? Why don't we gather with them and celebrate? Why don't we share our food? Why don't we share our history? Surely we must have one in common. And the parents would look at her and cross their arms, and they would say, because that's the way it's always been. And that is the way it always will be. Okay. So she goes off and she's looking around and she's asking these groups. She goes to the teenagers and says, has anybody ever told you why we fight with them? Because that's the way it's always been, we've been told. And if it's always been that way, then that's what we're going to do, because that's what our parents and our grandparents tell us we should do. Okay. She walks away and she wanders across the land of the village, and she's looking at the people on the other side of the stream, and she's looking at her people, and she sees the little tiny children. What could they know? Why would they not want to be friends with the children on the other side of the river? Kids love everybody. If we just let kids be kids, kids will make everything better. That's all she could think. So she went up to the little ones and said, why do you hate those kids over there? Don't you want to play with them? Should we get in our boats and row across the river and go have some fun? Maybe play, I don't know, some soccer or tag or something? And the little tiny children looked at her and they were just like, what are you talking about? We don't like them because it's always been that way. It's going to always be that way. Our mothers and fathers and our aunties and our uncles have told us, we don't talk to them. They are not nice people. They don't believe the way we believe, and we will have nothing to do with them. Oh, okay. And she walked away, and she wandered off until one of the hills behind the village. And she was looking at this vast expanse, this beautiful village that she lived in, with fruit trees and animals and grass and children laughing and teenagers dancing and moms and dads creating and growing food and then planning a big feast for the whole village. And she looked across the river and they were doing the same things. And she still couldn't understand why her people didn't like those people. What could they be doing so different that made them so awful and evil, and that we wouldn't want to be friends and join together? She sighed several big, deep sighs, and then she turned around, and sitting on a log behind her was a very, very old grandmother. And she walked up to the grandmother, and as she grew closer, the grandmother patted the log and said, my child, sit. Come sit. And so she sat down next to the grandmother, and they very quietly sat there for a while, saying nothing, just enjoying each other's company, looking at the two villages and just observing. And after a time, the grandmother turned to her and said, do you want the answer? Do you know how we fix this? And of course she was excited. She said, yes, tell me why. Why has it always been this way? What can we do? And the grandmother said, this is your assignment. You must go deep, deep, deep into the forest, and you must wait for the answer to come. And when you are ready, that answer will come. And she said, but grandmother, what am I supposed to say? Who am I going to meet? What is going to happen? And grandmother said, just take your lunch, put some food in it, put some herbs, put some coals, get ready to spend as much time as you need. So she wrapped her cloth with those precious things that grandmother had told her she would need. She walked off into the forest. What she didn't realize is that it was getting to be the time for the sun to set. But she knew she had a mission, and she didn't care how dark it would get. She was going to go into that forest, and she was going to find the answer, and she was going to fix it all. Because that's what the grandmother had told her she could do. And so she wandered into the forest, and she found a spot that felt very comfortable. And she sat down, and she waited. And she waited. And she waited. Pretty soon it got very, very, very dark. She pulled out the coals and the flint. She started herself a little fire just to push the darkness back a little bit. And so she took some of the food that she had wrapped in her cloth, and she had a little feast by herself. But she was so quiet. She was listening, and she was like, where's the answer? Where is the answer? I don't see anything. I'm all alone. I can hear the birds and all the critters, can hear the crickets and the frogs, but I'm not hearing an answer. She stayed there all night long. And when the sun rose in the morning, she gathered up everything and she walked back to the village. And she went up to the grandmother, who was still sitting on the log, and she said, I did exactly as you told me to do, grandmother, and I still don't have an answer. What did I do wrong? Grandmother sat very silent for a little while. And she got very nervous because she didn't know what grandmother was going to say. What did she miss? What didn't she hear grandmother say? What instructions? And grandmother looked at her and said, pack your cloth up again and go back into the forest until you get the answer. If you want the answer, you must do this until you get the answer. Okay, she said, I'll do that. So she hung around the village during the day and she watched everybody doing their work, and the moms and the other grandmas fixing food, and the kids playing and having a wonderful time. And late in the day, she packed her cloth again. And she wandered into the forest. And she found a different spot. She thought, well, maybe I wasn't in the right spot. So she picked a different spot. And she sat down and she waited. And when the sun set and the darkness was closing in on her, she started another fire. And she waited. And she waited. And she was tired. And she nodded off a couple of times and had to wake up, wake up, wake up. I need to answer. And so she sat there all night long again. No answer. What she did notice is that she was starting to hear the large animals coming closer. That made her a little nervous, but she stayed there all night. And when she got up and woke up in the morning and the sun was bright, she went back to the village, trudging back to the village, a little angry with the grandmother. She walked up to the grandmother, who's sitting there on the log, and said, Grandmother, 2 nights, 2 different spots. The only thing that was different last night, I could hear the big animals I heard a bear growl. I could hear the deer wandering around by me. I could hear a wolf howling. But everything else was the same. There was no answer, grandmother. And grandmother took a deep breath and said, do you want the answer? Yes, all right, I'll go back. I have to do this till I get the answer if I really want the answer, right? And grandmother said, yes, that's correct. If you really want the answer, you must continue looking for that answer. If you don't, then it's okay to stop. But if you really want the answer, you must repeat until you get the answer. So she packed her cloth again, and she wandered into the forest in that late afternoon. She went to a different spot. This time she picked some rocks, and she sat on the rocks. She kind of felt, well, maybe if I'm a little elevated, the answer can find me better. And so she sat there and sat there. And as the night closed in on her, she could hear the animals even closer. It was as if she could hear the bear growling in her ear. She knew he wasn't that close, but it sounded that close. And she was a little afraid. So she built the fire and she waited again all night long. This time she was a little nervous about what was going on around her, so she didn't nod off. She stayed awake all night long. The sun came up. No answer. So she trudged back into the village, and yeah, there was Grandma sitting on the log, a kind of a little smirk on her face, like, yeah, here we go. Yeah. So she walks up to the grandmother and says, Grandmother, and before she could say another word, grandmother said, how bad do you want the answer? Will you go again? Will you go till you have the answer? Is it really that important to you? Or are you just saying things and criticizing what already is instead of finding the solution? Well, that kind of took the breath out of her chest, and she went, okay, I'll go back tonight. So she went back a third night. The animals were getting closer. She knew she could smell that bear. Still no answer. She didn't even go to grandmother that time. She just said, okay, I'm going back. I want the answer. Fourth night, the animals were even closer. It was almost like they were going to sleep next to her. Terrified. But she stayed. She came back to the village the next morning with still no answer. And grandmother was sitting on the log, but she didn't ask grandmother anything. She said, I want the answer. And if this is what I have to do, this is what I'm going to do. She went back 5 times, 6 times. The 7th night, the animals had actually, these big, scary animals had actually gathered around her fire. She had to scoot back, hoping that they wouldn't see her, but they were gathered around the fire. And as she waited and waited, she got more and more afraid of those animals. They were sniffing the air, and their noses started to wiggle towards her direction. And she's like, oh no, am I going to get the answer? Or are those animals going to get me? Or what? She got down on her knees and she looked up at the sky and she begged, please, what is the answer? Give me the answer. I can't do this anymore. The animals are going to kill me and I don't have an answer and I want an answer and I can't come back here. And she's just panicking because I need the answer, but I'm not safe here anymore. How am I going to get the answer? How am I going to get the answer? And out of the sky, this big, round thing came down into her lap. And she thought at first, when she saw it coming out of the sky, she thought, is that the moon? Has the moon come out of the sky? Is that the moon? And then as it got closer, she saw, it's a drum. Oh my, a drum? Wow, how could that be? It's a drum. And the sun was coming up. And she picked up the drum. She wrapped up her cloth with whatever she had left. And she wandered slowly back to the village because she could not figure out, how is this drum an answer? Oh, but I hope it is, so I don't have to go back again tonight, because those animals are big and they're scary and they're really close. And so she wandered back into the village, and there was the grandmother. And she walked up to the grandmother with the drum, and the grandmother's face just lit up. I see you found the answer. I see you got your answer. You're such a good girl. You wanted an answer and you stayed until you got your answer, even though you were terrified. And she said, yes, but how is this an answer? How is this going to change things? And the grandmother said, you have another question to ask, but you don't need to go into the forest. Just take a walk around the village. Take your drum, take the stick, and see what you can see. She said, okay. How is this drum going to answer the age-old question and change the, because that's the way it's always been, to let's change it? So she walked around the village for a while, walked and walked and walked. And she's getting pretty bored. And I don't know if you can hear my chihuahua, but she's bugged about something. She started growling. I'm sorry. So she started to walk around and she was bored. And hemming and hawing and looking around. Pretty soon she starts going, oh. And as she's walking around the village, she all of a sudden notices people are stopping what they're doing. Just stopped and turned and looked at her. And she noticed the people that were down by the river, shaking their fists and calling the people on the other side of the river, had turned to look at her. And the people on the other side of the river had all stopped and were looking and listening to the sound of the drum. She thought, this is pretty interesting. So she started to beat a regular beat. And before you know it, all of the little kids stopped and looked at her and ran up to her. And as she was beating the drum, they started to dance. And they were clapping and they were pounding on their faces and on their chests and on their laps and on rocks and just having a wonderful time keeping time with the drum. So then she wandered over to the area where the teenagers were. And the teenagers were sitting there like, well, who does she think she is? She's no better than us. But then they caught the beat and they started to dance. And they were clapping and laughing and enjoying it. And she looked across the river. And the teenagers were dancing and clapping and actually singing. And she thought, this is interesting. So she kept the beat going And with the little children and the teenagers keeping up with her, pretty soon all the parents and grandparents stopped and turned and looked at her. And then what do you know? They started to dance and they started to sing. And she turned to look, and across the river, they were doing it too. And she thought, oh, this is interesting. We have something in common. We have something in common with those people. The love and joy of music and the drum. And pretty soon, everybody in the village is dancing and singing. And the folks on the other side of the village are laughing and dancing and singing. The only person that had not joined in was the grandmother on the log. And she sat there with the most joyous grin on her face. And she looked at this girl and she smiled and she shook her head. And when the young lady turned around to drum some more, lo and behold, the people in both villages had gotten into their boats and were crossing to each other's sides. And they were shaking hands and hugging and acting like they had been a tight community forever instead of, it's the way it's always been. And she said, this is the way it's always going to be, because we've been gifted the gift of music, which is something all of us have in common, and which unites all of us. And she drummed some more and danced with everybody and hugged the grandmothers from the other side of the river. And the mamas and the papas and the grandma and grandpas began to cook food. And there was a huge feast and a celebration. And people were crossing back and forth across the river and sharing supplies and sharing joy and happiness and music and having a wonderful time. A wonderful time. And then she stopped and she turned to see the face of the grandmother who had given her the task to find the solution if she really wanted to find that solution. And she was gone. And she started to ask about this grandmother, and nobody knew this grandmother. She was not a member of those villages, either village. And when she started to search for that grandmother, because she wanted to thank her and to give her a kiss, she couldn't find her. Nobody knew her. Nobody else had seen her. Nobody knew her name. They don't know where she came from. And she picked up the stick for her drum and she began to beat the drum again. And for the rest of the day, no, not really that day, for the rest of a week, the two villages joined together and celebrated the future, not the past. So, as we move into this dark period of going into our caves and being quiet, consider those things that you have always done, because they were always done, whether by your family, by yourself, by your spouse, by whoever, that there's really no reason for, because it always has been. It's not a good reason. certainly is not a reason to support things that are not healthy for us. Spend the time in your cave, in your retreat in this part of the dark time of the year. As we wait for the return of the oak king and queen in the spring, as the holly king and queen are now ruling the land. And there's this soon, well, at least up here, soon going to be covered with a blanket to help her sleep. White blanket of snow to help her sleep and rest, which she also needs to do. Mother Earth also needs to do that, just as we do, to take a period of time in the year to be introspective and retrospective. Spend some time thinking about what's good and what's not healthy. And how about 3 more breaths? Deep breaths. In with the ya and out with the way. Very deep cleansing breaths. Sit up straight and breathe in. This is also the time of the year, my friends, when the veil is very thin. And you, if you pay attention, will begin to hear your ancestors. And they can be part of that cleansing. They can reveal to you those things that have always been that way, that don't need to be that way. Very, very close. There's a reason why it's called All Hallows Eve. All Hallows Eve, the holy ones. And in the Christian faith, the next day is All Saints Day. Not any mistake why the pagan and Christian holidays or celebrations are at the same time. They piggyback on each other. And so if you need to, on All Hallows Eve, you put on a costume to masquerade so the evils can't find you because they won't recognize you, which is the tradition of the masks and the costumes, is so that the baddie energy out there can't find you, won't see you, won't recognize you. So if you need to do that too. So who's going trick-or-treating? Anybody going to give out candy to trick-or-treaters? Do you get trick-or-treaters? Manny, do you guys get them?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Carloads.
We had about 150 last year.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And the year before that, it was over 250.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, this year, I will not be counting because I'll be on Zoom. But Manny will be on his own.
What are you going to do with Max?
Well, I don't know why not. It makes a lot of sense what A Course in Miracles teaches us. We'll wear our costume.
I'll have to be out in the street giving candy.
Yep. He's got a solo journey this year.
Nobody else has got trick-or-treaters. They don't come here.
I usually only get 20 or 30 kids.
Yeah.
I live on a little cul-de-sac and they tend not to go down the cul-de-sac.
I'm kind of glad we're not getting trick-or-treaters because my little boo would be crazy.
Oh.
Like Max, probably.
Yeah.
Well, does Max bark at when people knock on the door?
Oh, yes. Now, Manny will set up a table out in the yard and hopefully that will help. But I have a feeling that Max is going to be
yeah, he's going to look out the window.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of.
Max needs a trick or treat sedative.
Karen, I
Thank
really,
you, Karen. It's nice to have you back.
Yeah.
Good to be.
yeah, we love you, dear. And you are the storyteller. There is no doubt.
I appreciate that. All right, my friends, my Arizona friends.
All right. Everybody
Is
have a
Alexander,
good night.
is Alexander in Arizona?
Yes.
Okay.
Happy birthday, Alexander.
Oh, and there's Sandus too.
Yes.
Should we sing happy birthday? I don't know that that's such a good. Lori could sing him happy birthday, but I don't think anybody want me to sing him happy birthday.
Well, I think it would be a gift to have Alex's birthday celebrated.
Sarah?
Go for it.
You wanna
Lori,
lead
you
it?
go for it today.
Okay.
I'll let Lori, take it over.
Happy birthday to you. Happy
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alex.
Alex.
Happy
Happy
birthday
to
to
you.
Happy birthday, Alex.
Happy birthday. Yay.
Happy birthday. And go D-backs.
And stay away, snow.
At least no.
Right. Yeah. I wonder, do you think the D-backs game is going to cut back on some of the trick-or-treating? It's at 5 o'clock our time, which means it's exactly prime time when people are trick-or-treating.
Dads will be on their cell phone watching.
Oh, there you go. They'll be carrying their cell phone around.
Yep. And watching it while they're taking the little ones.
Yeah, or the moms will be trick-or-treating with the kids and the dads will be
Dads
staying
will be
home.
at home.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's cool. So anyway.
Okay. You have a great week.
Yeah.
All right, you guys
We'll
stay
be
well.
happy. And Alex, may this be your happiest new birth year ever.
Thank you for being here, Alex.
Take care, everybody.
Hey, you
Peace,
too. Bye.
everybody.
Have a good evening. Gracias.